My daughter-in-law banned me from my son's wedding. That was painful enough, but when I discovered they still expected me to pay for their new house, a $450,000 gift I promised before being excluded, I made a decision that would change everything. The cashier's check in my desk drawer suddenly felt very heavy in my hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, crisp and white against the worn wood of my front porch. I recognized James' handwriting immediately. The same careful, deliberate script I'd watched develop from elementary school assignments to college applications. My son had always been particular about his penmanship, something I'd teased him about over the years. I carried the envelope inside with my morning newspaper and cup of coffee, setting it on the kitchen table while I went through my usual morning routine. The house was quiet, as it had been since Martha passed 3 years ago. The silence used to feel oppressive, but I'd grown accustomed to it, even found comfort in it sometimes. Finally, I sat down and opened the envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation, cream-colored with gold embossing. James Mitchell and Rebecca Collins cordially invites you to celebrate their union. The date was set for 3 months from now at Lakeside Gardens, one of the most expensive venues in our city. I smiled, running my fingers over the raised lettering. Despite our strained relationship over the past few years, he'd sent an invitation. Perhaps this was an olive branch, a chance to repair what had been broken. I continued reading, looking for my role in the ceremony, only to find a handwritten note tucked behind the invitation. "Dad, I wanted you to know about the wedding, but Rebecca feels your presence would cause tension with her family. We think it's best if you don't attend. I hope you understand. James." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. I read the note again, thinking perhaps I'd misunderstood, but the message was clear. I was being informed of my son's wedding, not invited to it. I set the invitation down and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Martha had lovingly tended for decades. She would have known what to say, how to respond. Without her steadying influence, I felt adrift. My relationship with James had been strained since Martha's death. We'd had a disagreement about her care in her final months. I'd wanted to keep her at home, while James had pushed for a specialized facility. The argument had grown heated, with words exchanged that couldn't be easily taken back. Still, I'd thought we were slowly mending those fences. Apparently not. And apparently my future daughter-in-law had opinions about my presence as well. Rebecca Collins had entered James's life 2 years ago. She came from a wealthy family, the kind that summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. I'd only met their parents twice, but both encounters had been cool at best. They seemed to view me, a retired high school teacher, as somehow beneath them. I returned to the table and noticed something else in the envelope. A smaller note with a bank account number and routing information. "For wedding gifts," it said in Rebecca's looping handwriting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. They didn't want me at the wedding, but they were happy to accept my financial contribution. The irony wasn't lost on me. My cell phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Caroline, James's younger sister. "Hey, Dad, did you get it?" Her voice was cautious. "The invitation?" "Yes, just now." Caroline sighed. "I told him it was a terrible idea. I'm so sorry." "Did you know about this?" "Not until yesterday. James called to warn me it was coming. I tried to talk him out of it, but Rebecca—" She trailed off. "But Rebecca what?" I prompted. "She's convinced you still disapprove of her, And she doesn't want any negative energy at the wedding. Her words, not mine. I pinched the bridge of my head, fighting back a headache. And what does James say about all this? He's caught in the middle. You know how he hates conflict. She paused. There's something else you should know. The hesitation in her voice made me brace myself. What is it? They're still expecting you to pay for the house. The house. 6 months ago, when James and Rebecca had announced their engagement, I'd made a promise, a wedding gift of the down payment for their first home together. It was money Martha and I had saved for years, originally intended to be split between James and Caroline for exactly this purpose. Caroline had used her portion when she married 5 years ago. You're telling me they don't want me at the wedding, but they still expect me to hand over a check for $450,000? The disbelief in my voice was palpable. Rebecca's been showing her friends pictures of this colonial in Riverside Hills. 5 bedrooms, pool, the works. They're planning to close right after the honeymoon. I felt something harden inside me. I see. Dad, please don't do anything rash. James is making a mistake, but he's still your son. After hanging up with Caroline, I sat in my silent kitchen for a long time. The invitation mocked me from the table. The elegant announcement of a celebration I wasn't welcome to attend. The bank account information for gifts felt like an additional slap in the face. I thought about Martha, about what she would advise in this situation. She'd always been the peacemaker in our family, finding ways to smooth over conflicts with grace and understanding. But even Martha had her limits when it came to disrespect. Finally, I reached for my phone and called James. It went to voicemail, as I suspected it might. James, it's Dad. I received your information about the wedding. We need to talk. Please call me back. He didn't call back that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, I received a text. Really busy with wedding plans. Can we talk after the honeymoon? That evening, I drove to Riverside Hills and found the house Caroline had mentioned. It wasn't hard to spot. A sprawling colonial with pristine landscaping and a circular driveway. The real estate sign out front had a pending banner across it. I sat in my car across the street, looking at what was to be James and Rebecca's first home. The home I was expected to help provide, even as I was shut out of their lives. Something shifted inside me as I sat there. A resolve I hadn't felt in years settled into place. I'd spent my life being reasonable, accommodating, putting others first, especially my children. But there came a point where accommodation became enabling, where generosity in the face of disrespect became foolishness. The next morning, I called my financial advisor and my lawyer. I had decisions to make. 2 weeks passed with no further communication from James. I saw on social media, through Caroline's account, as James had restricted mine years ago, that they had had an engagement party at Rebecca's parents' lake house. The photos showed James smiling, his arm around Rebecca, surrounded by her friends and family. My absence wasn't noted. Caroline called again, concerned. Dad, have you talked to James? He's too busy for a conversation with his father, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. What are you going to do about the house? They're expecting to close in 6 weeks. I'm aware of the timeline. Dad! Caroline, I love you, but this is between your brother and me. After we hung up, I went to my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a cashier's check for $450,000 made out to James and Rebecca. I'd had it prepared weeks ago, before the uninvitation arrived. It was to have been presented at the rehearsal dinner, a dinner I would now not be attending. I held the check in my hands, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical paper, but all it represented. Years of careful saving with Martha, dreams for our children's futures, the sacrifice of our own desires for theirs, and now the expectation that those sacrifices would continue, even as I was being pushed aside, deemed unwelcome in my own son's life milestone. I returned the check to the drawer and closed it firmly. Then I made another call to my lawyer. A month before the wedding, my phone rang while I was grading papers at my desk. I'd taken on some adjunct teaching at the local community college since retiring, partly for the extra income, but mostly to keep my mind active. Mr. Mitchell, this is Sandra Weiss from First Capital Mortgage. I'm calling regarding James Mitchell and Rebecca Collins' loan application. I set down my red pen. Yes? We're finalizing their application, and they listed you as providing the down payment gift. The down payment was intended as a gift from your mother and me, a gesture of support as you began your married life. But if I'm not welcome to witness that beginning, why would I fund it? So that's it? You're just going to let us lose the house because your feelings are hurt? I studied my son's face. So familiar and suddenly so foreign. My feelings aren't hurt, James. My trust is broken. There's a difference. What do you want from me? His voice cracked slightly. Rebecca's parents have already paid non-refundable deposits for everything. The invitations are sent. People have made travel arrangements. I want you to make this right. Tell Rebecca's family the truth about your mother and me. Include me in your wedding as your father. Show me that our relationship matters more than appearances or convenience. James stood up, pacing the room. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly, and your response tells me everything I need to know. I stood as well. I won't be providing the down payment, James, not under these circumstances. You can't do this. I can, and I have. The choice was yours, son. You chose to exclude me from one of the most important days of your life. Now I'm choosing to exclude myself from funding a house I'll likely never be welcomed into. He left in a fury of slammed doors and squealing tires. That night, I sat in Martha's garden, watching the sunset and talking to her as I often did, wondering if I'd gone too far, if I'd just destroyed what little relationship remained with our son. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Rebecca. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice cool and controlled. "I think we need to discuss this situation like adults." "I agree, Rebecca, though I would have preferred this conversation happen before I was uninvited to your wedding." "That decision wasn't made lightly," she replied. "My parents are very particular about family dynamics, and given the history—" "The fictional history," I interrupted. "Let's be clear. There was no divorce. Your parents have been misinformed, and rather than correct that misinformation, you and James chose to exclude me from your wedding." She paused, clearly thrown off script. "Regardless of how it happened, we're at this point now. And the fact remains that we've built our financial plans around your promised gift. Without it, we'll lose the house and forfeit our earnest money." "That's unfortunate, but it's the consequence of the choices you and James have made." "So, you're willing to hurt your son financially to make a point?" I took a deep breath. "Rebecca, when Martha and I set aside this money, it was with the expectation that we would be part of our children's lives, not just their financial plans. If James wants to prioritize your parents' comfort over his relationship with me, that's his right. But he doesn't get to exclude me personally while including me financially." "That's incredibly petty," she snapped. "Is it? Would you accept a significant gift from someone you've deemed unwelcome in your home?" "This is different." "No, it isn't. It's actually very simple. If I'm family, treat me as such. If I'm not, don't expect me to fund your lifestyle." The line went quiet for a moment. "What if," she finally said, her voice calculating, "what if we found a compromise about the wedding?" "I'm listening." "What if you attended the ceremony, but not the reception? That way you could see James get married, but we wouldn't have to worry about awkward interactions with my family." I couldn't help but laugh. "So I could watch from the back, then disappear before anyone has to acknowledge my existence, all while providing $500,000. That's not a compromise, Rebecca. That's an insult. You're being unreasonable." "No,
I'm being clear about my boundaries, something I should have done much sooner with James. After she hung up, I called my lawyer again and finalized the changes to my will that we'd been discussing. Then I called Caroline. Dad, James is furious. Rebecca's talking about postponing the wedding. It's chaos. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle, sweetheart. What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here? I considered her question carefully. I'm hoping your brother realizes that relationships matter more than appearances, that honesty matters more than convenience, that I matter more than a down payment. And if he doesn't, then at least I'll know where I stand.
The next 3 weeks were silent. The wedding date approached, but I received no further communication from James or Rebecca. Caroline kept me updated. The wedding was still on, but they'd had to scramble to find a smaller house they could afford without my contribution. Rebecca's parents were covering the difference on the earnest money they'd lose on the original house. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my living room, a glass of Martha's favorite bourbon in my hand, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was James. "Dad," he said, his voice rough. "I need to know if there's still a way forward here." I gripped the phone tighter, surprised by how much hearing his voice affected me. The bourbon in my glass caught the lamplight as I considered my response. "There's always a way forward, James. The question is whether you're willing to take it." He exhaled slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choices and consequences. And I realized I'd been making choices based on the wrong priorities." He paused. "Rebecca and I had a long talk tonight. Several, actually." I remained silent, letting him find his words. I told her parents the truth. About you and Mom, about how we disagree sometimes, but you've always been there for me, about how excluding you was wrong. Something tight in my chest began to loosen. "How did that go?" "About as well as you'd expect." He gave a humorless laugh. "Her father threatened to cancel the whole thing. Her mother cried. Rebecca was furious with me for ruining everything the night before our wedding. I'm sorry, son." "Don't be. It needed to happen. I should have done it months ago." He took a deep breath. "Dad, I don't expect you to change your mind about the house, but I'd like you to come to the wedding tomorrow. Not hidden away or just at the ceremony. I want you there, properly, as my father." The simple request, delivered without conditions or manipulations, hit me harder than I expected. "What about Rebecca and her parents?" "Rebecca will come around. She already has, a little. As for her parents, they'll either accept it or they won't. But I'm not starting my marriage with a lie." Pride, something I hadn't felt toward my son in too long, welled up in my throat. "What time should I be there?" "The ceremony's at 2, but I'd like you to come earlier if you could. I could use some help with my tie." It was an old joke between us. James had never mastered a proper Windsor knot, despite my many attempts to teach him. "I'll be there at noon," I promised. After we hung up, I sat staring at the phone, wondering if this sudden change was genuine or simply a last-minute attempt to salvage their housing situation. The cynical part of me couldn't help but be suspicious. But beneath that skepticism was a father's hope. Hope that my son had finally understood what truly mattered. I slept fitfully that night, dreaming of Martha. In my dream, she sat at our kitchen table, smiling that knowing smile of hers. "He's still learning," she said, reaching across to take my hand. "Just like you were at his age." I woke before dawn, her voice still echoing in my mind. The morning was clear and mild, perfect weather for a garden wedding. I showered and dressed carefully in the suit I'd bought months ago, when I still assumed I'd be walking into that venue with pride rather than trepidation. As I knotted my tie, I caught sight of myself in the mirror.
older than I sometimes remembered being, the lines around my eyes deeper, my hair more gray than brown now. Martha used to say those lines told our story. I wondered what chapter today would add. I arrived at Lakeside Gardens at precisely noon. The venue was already bustling with activity, florists arranging centerpieces, catering staff setting up tables, a string quartet rehearsing near the ceremony site. I half expected to be stopped at the entrance, questioned about my presence, but a young woman in a headset simply smiled and directed me to the groom's suite. James was alone when I knocked, standing by the window in his shirt and trousers, tie dangling from his hand. He turned when I entered, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "You came." I said I would. He nodded, then held out the tie with a small smile. "I still can't get it right." I stepped forward, taking the silk from his hands. Some things never change.
As I looped the tie around his collar, the familiar motions brought back countless memories. His first school dance, graduation, job interviews. The small, intimate moments of fatherhood that I'd always treasured. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said suddenly, his eyes fixed on some point over my shoulder. "Not just about the wedding, about everything these past few years. After Mom died." "We both made mistakes," I interrupted gently, adjusting the knot. "Grief does that to people. But I've been unfair to you, blaming you for decisions we should have made together, then letting Rebecca's family believe things that weren't true because it was easier." I finished with the tie, smoothing it down against his chest. "There, perfect." He caught my hand before I could step back. "The house doesn't matter, not compared to this, to us." The door opened before I could respond. Rebecca stood in the doorway, already in her wedding dress, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "You're not supposed to see me yet," she said to James, though her eyes were on me. "I'll give you two a moment," I offered, moving toward the door. "No," Rebecca said quickly. "Please stay, Mr. Mitchell. I owe you an apology." I remained where I was, watching as she fully entered the room, closing the door behind her. "James told me everything about your wife, his mother, about how he let my parents believe a story that wasn't true." She twisted her hands together nervously. "I was angry at first, at him for lying, at you for forcing this confrontation right before our wedding. But then I realized something." "What's that?" I asked. "That I was more worried about how things looked than how they actually were. I was so focused on creating the perfect wedding, the perfect house, the perfect image, that I lost sight of what really mattered." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. This wasn't the calculated Rebecca I'd spoken to on the phone. "My parents are still upset. They might always be. But I'm not marrying them. I'm marrying James. And you're his father. You should be here." James moved to her side, taking her hand. "We've been talking about the house situation too. We're going to find something we can afford on our own. Something smaller to start with." "It will be an adjustment," Rebecca admitted, "but it's the right thing to do." I studied them both, this young couple on the brink of their new life together. There was something different about them today, a solidarity that hadn't been there before, a maturity that came from facing difficult truths together rather than avoiding them. "I appreciate you both saying these things," I said carefully, "but I want to be clear. I didn't withhold the down payment to punish you or to force an invitation. It was about honesty and respect, about being treated as family, not just a financial resource." "We understand that now," James said, "and we're not asking you to change your mind. That's not why I wanted you here today." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "We made our choices. Now we're dealing with the consequences, just as you said." Their unified response, free from manipulation or entitlement, shifted something in me. Perhaps Martha had been right. Our son was still learning, but he was learning nonetheless. "Well," I said,
It seems we all have some adjusting to do. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. I sat in the front row, where fathers of the groom traditionally sit, aware of the curious and occasionally disapproving glances from Rebecca's side of the aisle. Her parents maintained a rigid politeness when James introduced us, her father's handshake firm to the point of aggression, her mother's smile never reaching her eyes. But none of that mattered as I watched my son take his vows, his voice clear and confident as he promised to love, honor, and cherish the woman beside him. In that moment, he looked so much like me on my wedding day, making those same promises to Martha, that my breath caught in my throat. During the reception, as dinner was being served, James clinked his glass and stood, drawing everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for being here today. Rebecca and I are overwhelmed by your love and support." He paused, his eyes finding mine. "I especially want to thank my father for being here, for teaching me what it means to stand by your principles, even when it's difficult." A murmur went through the crowd. This clearly wasn't in the planned speeches. Many of you know that Rebecca and I had our hearts set on a beautiful house in Riverside Hills. What you don't know is that we were counting on a generous gift from my father to make that possible. He looked directly at Rebecca's parents as he continued. "A gift that was withdrawn when I made the mistake of excluding him from our wedding planning and allowing misunderstandings about my family to persist." Rebecca stood and took his hand, supporting him as whispers spread among the guests. "We're starting our marriage with a valuable lesson," James continued, "that honesty matters more than appearances, that relationships are more important than real estate, and that sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is hold you accountable for your choices." He raised his glass toward me. "To my father, who taught me what real love looks like, not by giving me everything I wanted, but by giving me what I truly needed, the truth." The toast was met with a mix of responses. Warm applause from some, uncomfortable shifting from others, and stony silence from Rebecca's parents. But James and Rebecca stood tall, their decision to acknowledge the situation publicly a bold statement about the kind of marriage they intended to build. Later, as the dancing began, I found myself at a table with Caroline and her husband. "I'm proud of him," Caroline said, watching James and Rebecca on the dance floor. "I didn't think he had it in him to stand up like that." "Neither did I admitted. "But sometimes people surprise you." "So what happens now?" she asked. "About the house?" I sipped my champagne thoughtfully. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether today was about genuine growth or just making the best of a difficult situation." Caroline studied my face. "You still have doubts." "Let's say I'm cautiously optimistic. One day doesn't erase years of patterns." As the evening wore on, Rebecca's mother approached my table, her expression carefully neutral. She sat down without invitation, arranging her silk dress with precise movements. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "I feel we should clear the air." "Mrs. Collins," I acknowledged, "I want you to know that we were not responsible for your exclusion from the wedding preparations. We were simply told you preferred not to be involved due to complicated family dynamics." I nodded, unsurprised. "And you accepted that without question?" "We had no reason to doubt our daughter or your son." She paused, studying me. "Though I now wonder what other misconceptions we've been operating under." Perhaps it would be better to ask direct questions in the future rather than making assumptions. She had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Perhaps, though I must say, withdrawing your financial support seems an extreme response to a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mrs. Collins. It was a choice James and Rebecca made, and choices have consequences." "Indeed they do." She glanced toward the dance floor, where Rebecca was now dancing with her father.
My husband and I have made up the difference on the earnest money they'll lose on the house. It's not insignificant." "That's very generous of you." "We can afford it." The statement was delivered with just enough emphasis to remind me of the financial disparity between our families. But the house they've had to settle for instead is, well, let's just say it's not what Rebecca is accustomed to. I set down my glass, finally understanding the purpose of this conversation. "And you're concerned about your daughter's comfort. Any parent would be. Any parent would also want their child to learn independence, resilience, and the value of earning what they have." Mrs. Collins raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Is that what this is? A lesson?" "No, Mrs. Collins. It's a boundary. I'm sure you're familiar with the concept, given how carefully you maintain your own." Before she could respond, James appeared at the table. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes watchful. "Just getting to know each other better," I replied, standing. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll get some air." Outside, the garden lights illuminated the pathways around the lake, creating a magical atmosphere as evening settled in. I found a quiet bench and sat, watching the ripples on the water as a light breeze passed over it. James found me there a few minutes later. "Mom trying to negotiate a new deal?" he asked, sitting beside me. I chuckled. "Something like that." I figured. "She means well, in her own way." "Most parents do, even when they go about it all wrong." I gave him a meaningful look, and he had the good sense to laugh. "Touché." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Rebecca and I have been thinking about what happens next." The cashier's check remained in my desk drawer, not forgotten, but waiting for the right moment, if that moment ever came. James and Rebecca had found a modest apartment across town. It wasn't in the prestigious neighborhood they had initially hoped for, but it was clean, well-maintained, and within their budget. They'd invited me over for dinner several times, each visit less awkward than the last. Rebecca was trying. I had to give her credit for that. The carefully curated perfection she'd once insisted upon had given way to something more authentic. Their home wasn't immaculate. It showed signs of actual living. Books stacked on coffee tables, a dish or two in the sink, throw pillows slightly askew. Tonight was our monthly dinner, a tradition we'd established in the aftermath of their wedding day revelations. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a folder tucked under my arm. "Right on time," James said, opening the door with a smile that reached his eyes. The subtle tension that had once lingered in his shoulders whenever I visited was notably absent. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "David, good to see you. Dinner's almost ready." "Something smells wonderful," I commented, handing James the wine. "Rebecca's trying her hand at Mom's lasagna recipe," James explained, leading me into their small living room. "Caroline gave her the recipe last week." The mention of Martha's signature dish and the fact that Rebecca had sought it out warmed something in me. That's thoughtful." Rebecca shrugged, but I could tell she was pleased by my reaction. "James talks about it all the time. Figured I should at least try to live up to the legend." While she returned to the kitchen, James poured the wine. "So, what's in the folder? More budgeting spreadsheets?" He'd been diligently following my financial advice, tracking their expenses and building their first real savings account. "Not exactly." I placed the folder on the coffee table. "Just some information I thought might interest you both." Before he could ask more, Rebecca called us to dinner. The lasagna wasn't quite Martha's. No one could replicate her perfect balance of spices, but it was a heartfelt attempt that deserved appreciation. "This is excellent," I told Rebecca sincerely. "You've got the basics exactly right." Her smile was genuine. "Thanks. Next time I'll try to get that herb blend closer to the original." Over dinner, we talked about ordinary things. James's recent promotion at work, Rebecca's decision to leave her high-pressure marketing job for a position at a local nonprofit, and my adventures in teaching comparative literature to first-year college students. "How are things with your parents?" I asked Rebecca carefully. Relations with the Collins family had remained strained since the wedding, a topic usually avoided during our dinners. Rebecca sighed, setting down her fork. "Still complicated. Mom calls every week to remind me that their offer to help us upgrade is still open." "And your response?" I asked. "The same as always, that we're doing fine on our own." She glanced at James. "Actually, better than fine." James reached across the table to take her hand. "We had a long talk with them last weekend. Tried to explain again that we're not rejecting their help to be stubborn. We're just trying to build something that's truly ours." "And how did that go?" I took a sip of wine, watching them carefully. "About as well as you'd expect," Rebecca admitted. "Dad still thinks we're being foolish. Mom can't understand why we'd choose to struggle when they could make things easier." "But the difference now," James added, "is that we're okay with them not understanding. Their approval isn't the goal anymore." After dinner, as Rebecca cleared the plates, insisting I stay seated, "Guest privileges, David," James remembered the folder. "So, what's this information you brought?" he asked, retrieving it from the living room. "Take a look," I suggested as he returned to the table. He opened the folder and began reviewing the contents: property listings, financial projections, and renovation estimates for several modest houses in up-and-coming neighborhoods. "What's all this?" Rebecca asked, returning with coffee. "Investment properties. Small, single-family homes that need work but are in areas showing strong growth potential. The kind of properties a young couple might purchase to renovate and either live in or rent out." James looked up from the papers, confusion evident in his expression. "Are you buying more rental properties?" "I'd purchased 2 small rentals over the years as part of my retirement planning, something James knew about but we'd never discussed in detail." "No," I said, "I'm not buying anything. These are opportunities I've researched for you two to consider." Rebecca sat down slowly. "For us? But we can't afford—" "Look at the numbers," I suggested. "Based on what you've saved over the past 6 months and your current income, you could qualify for a mortgage on any of these properties. They're not mansions in Riverside Hills, but they have potential." James spread the papers across the table, examining the details more closely. "Even with a down payment of just 10%, we'd be stretching ourselves thin. And then there's renovation costs?" "Which is where this comes in," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and placing a business-sized envelope on the table. "A loan, not a gift. With terms." They exchanged glances before James picked up the envelope. Inside was a promissory note for $100,000 at 2% interest, with a 5-year grace period before repayment would begin. "Dad, we can't accept this," James started. "Why not?" "It's not the down payment I originally promised. It's substantially less, actually. And it's not a gift with strings attached. It's a business arrangement between family members who trust each other." Rebecca studied the document. "These terms are incredibly generous." "They're fair," I corrected. "The interest rate covers inflation. The grace period gives you time to complete renovations and stabilize your finances. And I've included a clause that converts part of the loan to a gift upon the birth of each grandchild." I smiled at their surprised expressions. "What? A man can hope." James shook his head, but he was smiling too. "You've thought this through." "I have. And I've watched you both these past 6 months. You've made hard choices, lived within your means, built something meaningful together without external help. You've earned my respect and my confidence in your ability to handle this responsibility." Rebecca looked down at her hands, then met my eyes directly. "When we first met, I thought you were just old-fashioned, difficult. I didn't understand why you couldn't just give James what his friends' parents gave them, why everything had to be such a lesson." And now? I asked. Now I'd understand that the easy path isn't always the best one, that earning something means valuing it differently. She glanced around their small apartment. This place isn't what I dreamed of, but it's ours. We pay for it ourselves. We make the decisions. There's freedom in that I never expected. James studied the property listings again. These would be projects, real work. That's the point, I said. You'd be building equity, yes, but also building something together, learning skills, making decisions as partners, creating value where others only saw problems to be fixed. Like what you and Mom did with your first house, James said quietly. The comparison caught me by surprise. Martha and I had purchased a dilapidated Victorian as newlyweds, spending weekends and evenings renovating it room by room over years. Those memories were some of my most treasured. The two of us covered in paint, arguing over tile patterns, celebrating when we finally completed the kitchen after 3 years of saving. Yes, I said, my voice slightly rough. Exactly like that. Rebecca reached for James's hand. We should think about it. Really think about it. Of course, I agreed. There's no rush. The properties aren't going anywhere, and neither is my offer. Later, as I prepared to leave, James walked me to my car. The night air was cool, stars bright overhead in the clear autumn sky. You know, he said, hands in his pockets, I used to think your financial caution was just cheapness or fear of change. I remember, I said dryly. You weren't shy about expressing that opinion. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, well, I was wrong. All those lessons about saving, about delayed gratification, about building something that lasts, I get it now. Especially seeing how Rebecca's parents operate. How's that? They use money as control, as a way to keep her dependent on them and their approval. He shook his head. You used money as a tool to teach independence, even when it meant being the bad guy. The insight surprised me, not because it wasn't true, but because I hadn't expected James to articulate it so clearly. Your mother and I always wanted you and Caroline to stand on your own feet, to know that you could build a life without handouts or shortcuts. I know that now. He hesitated, then asked, The cashier's check from before the wedding, did you really keep it? I did. Why? I considered the question carefully, because tearing it up would have been a statement of finality, of giving up on you, and I never did. He nodded slowly. Thank you for that, for not giving up, even when I made it hard not to. 2 weeks later, James called to ask if I could meet them at one of the properties I'd suggested, a 1940s craftsman in a historic neighborhood that had fallen into disrepair but maintained good bones and character. When I arrived, they were already there, walking the perimeter of the house, Rebecca making notes on a clipboard. The sight reminded me so much of Martha that I had to take a moment before approaching them. What do you think? James called when he spotted me. I think you're looking at a lot of work, I replied honestly, joining them to examine the sagging porch, but also a lot of potential. Rebecca pointed to the detailed notes she'd made. We've been researching. James took a carpentry workshop last weekend. I've been studying up on electrical basics. We know we'd need professionals for the big stuff, but there's a lot we could learn to do ourselves. We've run the numbers a dozen different ways, James added. With your loan and our savings, we could make this work. It would be tight, but doable. The determination in their voices was unmistakable. This wasn't the same couple who had expected a luxury home as their birthright. This was a partnership forged through challenges, strengthened by shared purpose. Have you made an offer? I asked. Not yet, Rebecca said. We wanted your opinion first, not just on the house, but on our plan. They showed me their detailed spreadsheet, renovation estimates, timeline projections, budget constraints, all meticulously researched and realistic. They had identified which tasks they could handle themselves with proper guidance and which would require professional help. They'd even factored in a healthy contingency for the inevitable surprises old houses always hide. As we walked through the empty rooms, sunlight streaming through dirty windows illuminating worn hardwood floors and architectural details hidden beneath years of neglect, I could see the vision they shared taking shape. They didn't see the water stains or cracked plaster. They saw what could be with patience and effort. "This room would be perfect for a nursery someday," Rebecca commented, stopping in a small bedroom with a bay window. The comment wasn't performative or calculated. It was simply an observation shared between partners planning a future. "The conversion clause in your loan might come in handy sooner than you thought," James added with a smile. The casual revelation hung in the air for a moment before I processed its meaning. "Are you saying—" Rebecca nodded, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. "We just found out last week. It's early days still, but yes, you're going to be a grandfather." The emotion that surged through me was overwhelming, joy mixed with a bittersweet ache that Martha wasn't here to share this moment. That's wonderful news." James put his arm around Rebecca. "We weren't planning on it happening quite this soon, but sometimes life has other ideas." "Does this change your thoughts about the house?" I asked, practical concerns momentarily overtaking emotion. "Actually, it makes us more certain," Rebecca said. "We don't want to raise our child in that apartment. We want a home, a real home that we've built together, with a yard and rooms that tell a story of who we are and what we value." Looking at them standing together in that dusty, potential-filled room, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was exactly what Martha and I had hoped for our children, not ease or luxury, but purpose. The ability to create something meaningful through their own efforts. To understand that the most valuable things in life are those earned through perseverance and shared vision. "I think you should make the offer," I said simply. 3 days later, their offer was accepted. The following weekend, we met at the house with tape measures, notebooks, and takeout lunch, planning the renovation in earnest. I found myself sharing stories about the mistakes Martha and I had made in our first renovation, the wall we'd removed only to discover it was load-bearing, the plumbing disaster that flooded our bedroom, the wallpaper pattern that had seemed perfect in the store but made us dizzy once installed.
"Mom never mentioned any of this," James said, laughing at my description of our first attempt at tiling. "Of course not. She was too busy documenting our successes in those photo albums she kept." I smiled at the memory. But the failures were just as important, maybe more so. "How do you mean?" Rebecca asked. "Because that's where we learned about the house, about ourselves, about each other. Anyone can hire someone to create perfection. There's no growth in that. No story to tell." As we continued planning, I noticed a shift in how James and Rebecca interacted. There was a quiet confidence between them, a balance that hadn't existed before. They disagreed on certain design elements, but their discussions were respectful, focused on finding solutions rather than winning arguments. They listened to each other, compromised, built consensus. When we broke for lunch, sitting cross-legged on the floor of what would be their living room, I found myself thinking about cycles and lessons, about how sometimes we have to allow our children to face the consequences of their choices, even when it's painful to watch, about how true growth often comes not from smooth paths, but from overcoming obstacles. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" James asked, noticing my silence. "About journeys," I replied, "about how rarely they go as planned, and how that's usually for the best." Rebecca nodded. "If you had given us that down payment for the Riverside Hills house, we'd be living in a beautiful home right now." "But," I prompted, "but we wouldn't be the people we are today," she finished. "We wouldn't have learned what we've learned, about money, about ourselves, about what really matters." "And what does really matter?" I asked. James looked around the room, at the peeling wallpaper and scuffed floors, then back at Rebecca. "This, building something real together,
knowing that whatever challenges come, we can face them as partners. Rebecca placed her hand on her still flat stomach, and giving our child a legacy of values, not just possessions. The words could have sounded rehearsed, like something from a self-help book, but they didn't. They carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom, of lessons integrated into their worldview rather than merely intellectualized. As we finished lunch and prepared to take measurements for the kitchen renovation, James paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking about that cashier's check, the original one for the Riverside Hills house." "What about it?" I asked, curious. "I think you should tear it up now." He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded in agreement. "Not because we don't appreciate what it represents, but because we don't need it anymore. Not in that form." "Are you sure?" I asked. "That's a significant amount of money." "It is," Rebecca acknowledged. "And someday, if you still want to help with our child's education or some other meaningful purpose, we'd be grateful. But right now, this loan for the renovation is exactly what we need, a hand up, not a hand out." James added, "The check represents who we were then. This loan, this project, it represents who we are now." The distinction struck me as profound. They weren't rejecting help outright. They were redefining what help meant in the context of their evolving values. They were establishing healthy boundaries while maintaining connection, finding balance. "I'll tear it up," I promised, "and I'll be here next weekend with my tool belt. There's a trick to removing wallpaper that took Martha and me 3 houses to perfect." As I drove home that evening, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I found myself filled with a quiet contentment. The path to this point had been uncertain, sometimes painful, but ultimately necessary. By standing firm when it would have been easier to give in, by prioritizing growth over comfort, I'd helped my son and his wife discover a truth that would serve them well throughout their lives. That the most valuable gifts aren't those that remove obstacles, but those that help us develop the strength to overcome them ourselves. The house in Riverside Hills was never meant to be theirs. This humble craftsman, with all its flaws and challenges and potential for transformation, was their true destination. Not because of what it was, but because of what creating a home within it would make them become. And in that knowledge, I found peace. The renovation of the Craftsman House became our shared project over the next 9 months, transforming not just the physical structure, but deepening the bonds between us.
Every weekend, I'd arrive with coffee and donuts to find James and Rebecca already at work. She in overalls with her growing baby bump, he with an increasingly confident handling of tools that once mystified him. We created a rhythm, the 3 of us. I taught them what Martha and I had learned through our own renovation adventures, but I also stepped back, allowing them to make their own decisions, their own mistakes, their own discoveries. Some weekends, Caroline and her husband joined us, turning demolition days into family affairs filled with dust, laughter, and shared purpose. As spring turned to summer and Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, the house gradually revealed its potential. Beneath layers of outdated wallpaper, we found original beadboard. Behind a false ceiling in the dining room, decorative plaster medallions emerged. Each discovery felt like the house was sharing its secrets with those willing to listen. "It's like the house is teaching us patience," Rebecca remarked one afternoon as we painstakingly stripped decades of paint from an ornate banister. "You can't rush this process." "That's true of most worthwhile things," I agreed, watching as she worked with meticulous care. The marketing executive, who had once prioritized appearances above all else, had been replaced by a woman who found satisfaction in authenticity and craftsmanship. James, overhearing from the adjoining room where he was repairing window frames, added, "Remember when we thought we could just pay someone to create the perfect house for us, have them make all the decisions?" Rebecca smiled ruefully. "We would have missed all of this, the satisfaction of doing it ourselves, of understanding how our home actually works. And the stories," I added. "Every scar and callus comes with a story you'll tell for years." James held up his hands, showing fresh blisters from sanding. "Already got plenty of those."
Wait until you're telling your child about how you restored these floors while waiting for them to arrive, I said, nodding toward Rebecca's prominent belly. Those are the stories that matter. By the 7th month of Rebecca's pregnancy, the essential renovations were complete enough for them to move in. The master bedroom and nursery were finished first, followed by the kitchen and main bathroom. Other rooms remained works in progress, but the house had transformed from a neglected shell into a warm, inviting home that reflected their evolving tastes and values. The day they officially moved in, I arrived to find Rebecca arranging family photos on a shelf in the living room. Pictures of her parents alongside ones of Martha and me, images from their wedding day beside childhood photos of James with Caroline. "This looks nice," I commented, setting down the housewarming plant I'd brought. "I want our child to know where they come from," she said, adjusting a frame that held a particularly beautiful photo of Martha in her garden. "All sides of their family, all the stories." Her words struck me. When we'd first met, Rebecca had seemed intent on curating a perfect image, one that often excluded parts of reality that didn't fit her vision. Now she was deliberately creating space for the complex, sometimes messy truth of family relationships. "Speaking of family," I said carefully, "have your parents seen the house yet?" A shadow crossed her face. "They're coming next weekend. Dad's still convinced we made a terrible mistake. Mom at least pretends to be supportive, though I can tell she's horrified by the neighborhood." "And how do you feel about their visit?" She considered the question seriously. "Nervous, but also confident?" That sounds strange, doesn't it? I used to be so desperate for their approval. Now I just want them to see that we're happy, that we've built something meaningful. If they can't appreciate that, she shrugged, that's their loss. The maturity in her response impressed me. That's a healthy perspective. I've had good examples of what it means to offer support without trying to control, to love someone enough to let them find their own path. The following weekend, I purposely stayed away, giving Rebecca and James space to host their parents without the added complexity of my presence. But James called that evening, after they had left. "Dad, you won't believe what happened," he said, his voice animated. "Rebecca's father actually complimented our work, said the craftsmanship on the restored woodwork was impressive."
Really? That doesn't sound like him. I know. I almost fell over. And then he asked if I'd show him how we'd fixed the foundation issues. We spent an hour crawling around in the basement while I explained everything we'd learned. I smiled, picturing the scene. People can surprise you sometimes. Her mother was less enthusiastic, James admitted. Kept suggesting designers who could help us maximize the potential. But even she admired the nursery. "It's a start," I offered. "More than that," James said. "It's the first time I've ever seen her father engage with anything we've done without criticism. He even asked if I'd help him restore some woodwork in their lake house." "Sounds like you might have found some common ground." "Maybe," James agreed. "Or maybe he's finally seeing us differently." 2 weeks later, I received an unexpected call from Thomas Collins, Rebecca's father. We'd maintained a careful politeness at family gatherings since the wedding, but had never spoken directly without James or Rebecca present. "David," he began, without preamble, "I wonder if you might have some time to meet this week. There's a matter I'd like to discuss." Curious and slightly wary, I agreed to meet him for lunch at a restaurant halfway between our homes. When I arrived, he was already seated, his posture as rigid and formal as ever, but something in his expression seemed different. After we ordered, he came directly to the point. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly not coming easily to him. "I misjudged your intentions with James and Rebecca." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "When you withdrew your financial support before the wedding, I thought you were being vindictive, or at the very least trying to assert control." He straightened his silverware unnecessarily. "I've come to realize your approach had merit." "What changed your perspective?" I asked. "Seeing what they've accomplished with that house, the pride they take in having done the work themselves." He met my eyes directly. "My daughter has changed, matured, and I believe your influence has played a role in that." Coming from Thomas, This was tantamount to effusive praise. They did the hard work themselves, I said, made their own choices. Perhaps, but your willingness to let them struggle, to find their own way. He shook his head slightly. It's not the approach I would have taken. Catherine and I have always tried to smooth the path for Rebecca, remove obstacles, provide advantages. Different philosophies of parenting, I acknowledged. Yes, and I'm beginning to wonder if ours was entirely correct. The admission seemed to cost him something. Rebecca seems more grounded now, more capable, more herself. We talked for nearly 2 hours, finding unexpected common ground in our concerns for our children's futures, our hopes for the grandchild who would soon connect our families. By the end, a tentative respect had formed between us. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition of the other's place in this expanding family circle. As we were preparing to leave, Thomas said, "I've set up a college fund for the baby. Substantial one, but I'm reconsidering how it's structured." He paused. "I'd appreciate your thoughts on creating something that supports their education without removing the need for effort or appreciation." The request surprised me. "I'd be happy to discuss options with you." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. I find myself reconsidering many things these days. It seems even at our age there are still lessons to be learned." On a bright September morning, my phone rang at 4:30 a.m. James's voice was breathless with excitement and anxiety. "Dad, it's time! Rebecca's water broke. We're heading to the hospital now." I dressed quickly and drove through the quiet, pre-dawn streets, my heart racing with anticipation. By the time I arrived, Rebecca was already in the delivery room with James by her side. The waiting room soon filled with family: Caroline and her husband, Rebecca's parents, a few close friends. Thomas Collins and I found ourselves sitting side by side as the hours passed, both of us too anxious to make much conversation, but drawing comfort from the shared experience of becoming grandfathers. "They're so young," he murmured at one point. "Do you think they're ready?" I smiled at the universal parental worry.
No one's ever really ready, but they're more prepared than most. "Because of the house?" he asked, understanding my meaning. "Because of what building it together taught them. How to solve problems as a team. How to persevere when things get difficult. How to create something lasting through their own efforts." He nodded slowly. "Important lessons." "The most important," I agreed. At 2:17 that afternoon, James emerged from the delivery room, his face alight with wonder and exhaustion. "It's a girl," he announced. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Everyone's doing great." The waiting room erupted in celebration. When it was my turn to visit the new family, I entered the hospital room to find Rebecca propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle against her chest. The sight of them, my son standing proudly beside his wife and child, brought emotions so powerful I had to pause in the doorway. "Dad," James said softly, "come meet your granddaughter." I approached the bed, looking down at the tiny face peering out from the blankets. She had James's chin and what looked like Rebecca's nose, a perfect blend of both families. "We'd like you to meet Martha Rose Mitchell," Rebecca said, her eyes meeting mine. "Named for her grandmothers." The unexpected honor of hearing my late wife's name given to this new life brought tears I couldn't hold back. "Martha," I repeated, touching the baby's tiny hand with my finger. "She would have been so proud of all of you." "We want her to know the stories," James said, "about Mom, about how you taught us what matters, about the house we built for her." "Stories are the best inheritance," I agreed, as Martha's tiny fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength. Later that evening, as the new parents rested, I found myself walking the hospital corridors alongside Thomas Collins. We stopped at the nursery window, looking in at our shared granddaughter among the other newborns. "She'll have advantages," Thomas said suddenly, "but not the kind I always thought were important." "Oh?" I prompted.
She'll grow up in a home where her parents know how to work for what matters, where they understand value beyond price tags." He glanced at me. "Catherine and I gave Rebecca everything, except perhaps the confidence that she could create a meaningful life without our resources. It's never too late to learn that lesson," I pointed out, "or to teach it." He nodded thoughtfully. "The college fund I mentioned, I've restructured it. Part will be available unconditionally for education, but the rest will be matching funds, dollar for dollar against what James and Rebecca save themselves." The approach surprised and impressed me. That's thoughtful, supportive without removing their agency. "I had a good example to follow," he admitted, a rare humility in his tone. 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, we gathered at James and Rebecca's home for Martha's baptism. The house was fully restored now, each room reflecting the care and intention they'd poured into it. The garden was beginning to take shape, with newly planted beds that would mature in the coming years growing alongside their daughter. After the ceremony, as family and friends mingled on the back patio, I found myself standing with James at the edge of the yard, watching Rebecca show baby Martha a butterfly that had landed on a flowering bush. "I never thought we'd end up here," James said quietly. "In this house, you mean?" "In this life," he clarified. "When you canceled that payment on the Riverside Hills house, I was furious, convinced you were trying to ruin everything." I remember. But looking back, it was the moment everything changed. The moment we had to decide what we truly valued, what kind of marriage we wanted to build. He looked around at the home they'd created. "I can't imagine living anywhere else now, or being anyone else." "The paths that challenge us often lead to the destinations that fulfill us," I observed. "Exactly. And now I understand why you held firm even when it would have been easier to just write the check." He turned to face me fully. "Thank you for believing we could be more than what we were showing you." Rebecca joined us then, baby Martha babbling happily in her arms. "What are you two discussing so seriously?" "The road not taken, and how thankful we are for the one we found instead."
She nodded, understanding immediately. "I was just thinking about that. If we'd gotten that first house, we'd have the address everyone envied, but we wouldn't have this." She gestured around them. "A home we understand down to its foundations, that we literally built with our own hands." "And with a bit help," I added, thinking of all the weekends we'd worked together, the lessons shared across generations. "The right kind of help," Rebecca emphasized, looking at me gratefully, "the kind that strengthens rather than weakens." As the afternoon continued, I watched our extended family interact with a harmony that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. Rebecca's parents chatted comfortably with Caroline and her husband. Friends from different circles found common interests. The artificial divisions that had once seemed so important had faded in significance, replaced by the simple joy of shared connection. Later, as I prepared to leave, James walked me to my car. "Dad, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that?" "That cashier's check, the original one for the Riverside Hills house, did you really tear it up like I asked?" I smiled, reaching into my pocket. "Actually, I brought it with me today." I handed him the envelope. He opened it curiously, finding not the original check, but a new document. The deed to my own home, with a transfer notation making it a joint ownership between myself and a trust established for Martha Rose Mitchell's future education. "Dad, what is this?" he asked, confused. "My home has always been meant for you children eventually, but rather than wait until I'm gone, I thought it made more sense to begin the transition now." I explained the structure. I would continue living there, but the equity would help secure Martha's future while establishing a family legacy that bridged generations. I don't know what to say," James stammered. "You don't need to say anything. Just understand that what I'm giving isn't just property, but a continuation of what your mother and I believed in, that family supports family, not by removing challenges, but by providing foundations from which to grow." He nodded, carefully folding the document and returning it to the envelope. We'll explain it to Martha someday. Make sure she understands what it means. I know you will. I glanced back at the house they'd transformed, at the family gathering visible through the windows. You've built something remarkable here, son. Not just a home, but a life guided by purpose rather than appearance. That's a gift worth far more than any check I could have written. As I drove away, watching the house recede in my rearview mirror, the fresh paint gleaming in the afternoon sun, the gardens beginning to bloom, the porch where generations would gather for years to come, I felt a profound sense of completion. The difficult decision to cancel that payment, to hold firm when it would have been easier to give in, had set in motion a transformation none of us could have predicted. Sometimes love means saying no when every instinct pushes you to say yes. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the space to discover their own strength, even when that discovery comes through disappointment and recalibration. The house in Riverside Hills would have been a possession. This home they'd created was a testament to perseverance, to partnership, to priorities properly ordered. And as I turned the corner, the house disappearing from view, but the memory of my granddaughter's laugh still echoing in my mind, I knew Martha would have approved. Of all of it. The hard boundaries, the harder lessons, the joy that comes not from having everything handed to you, but from building something meaningful through your own efforts and determination. That, in the end, was the true inheritance worth passing on. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.